Welcome to Ponchatoula Live, the show where we make it easy for you to connect with the people of Ponchatoula. I'm your host, Parker Layrisson, and today I've got a fantastic guest. This is one of the people I've admired since the day I returned to Ponchatoula to practice law about 20 years ago, because she's always been a local legal leader in that she's a lawyer that people admire. She represents her clients with tenacity and character and goodwill and everything you would want out of an attorney. But she's also just a human that I enjoy being around. She's a fun, upbeat, spirited person. And Brandy and I are happy to announce that she'll soon be our neighbor. So we're glad to be living near Patricia Hicks. She's just one of our favorite people. So with no further ado, Patricia, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Parker. Thank you for those kind words. I appreciate it.
I meant them. You're one of the best. And of course, we're going to get into your career as a judicial hearing officer with the 21st Judicial District and talk about that later in the program.
Okay.
I'm looking to learn this stuff because, as you know, I never spend any time in family court. You may not know I didn't even take family law in law school. So while people may expect me as an attorney to know a little bit about what you do, the reality is I know nothing. So I'll be learning with our viewers, because your role is a very important one. Your job is a very prestigious one. But before we get to that, why don't we start with you just telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay, let's see. I'm originally a Louisiana girl. I was born in New Orleans, but my family moved to Texas. So I really spent most of my formative years in Austin, Texas.
Oh, so, keep it weird. Austin.
Yeah, keep it weird. Keep it weird. You know, gotta love the bats and everything.
Yeah, well, you know, my brother Louis migrated to Texas, and so I've got nephews that are Texans, but they're Houston Texans, and from what I'm told, that's very different than Austin, Texas.
Not to bash Houston,
yeah.
But there's nothing like Austin. You know, the hill country
right.
is beautiful. It's going to be bluebonnet season soon over there. I still go back there periodically just to go look at the bluebonnets. I mean, there's just something beautiful about the hill country.
Yeah. So come summertime, you're dreaming of Lake Travis, not Lake Maurepas, I guess, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Not that there's anything wrong with Lake Maurepas. Been on a boat down there plenty of times, but yeah, Texas is near and dear to my heart, the Austin.
Yeah.
So.
Well, tell us then, so you're born in New Orleans, but you grow up over there. How did you make your way back here?
You know, we ended up coming back here. My family did. My parents were both born and bred in New Orleans, and as their parents got older, they moved home to be closer to them. And so when we came back here, I did my last couple of years in high school in Louisiana, and then went off to LSU and got my undergraduate at LSU, and then went on and got my Juris Doctorate, my JD from LSU Law Center.
Okay. So folks, if you had any problems about her Texas roots, you know, we're speaking with an LSU Tiger here, a double degreed LSU Tiger. So you passed the cut. You're born here.
Okay, fair enough.
You wised up and came back. So that's neat. Now, you mentioned returning to the New Orleans area, I think, right, where your grandparents were. Is that where you went to high school? And if so, what was it like going from big city of New Orleans to LSU? I mean, can you tell us anything? Because most of us around here go to itsy bitsy Ponchatoula. They're not huge Ponchatoula High, but you know, we're from this little town of thousands, not hundreds of thousands. I'm sure your experience was different if you went to high school in the city.
I ended up in high school at Bonneville out in Metairie. And I got to tell you, it was a strange experience because, having started in high school in Texas, everything was co-ed there. Mm-hmm. And when I moved back here, we still had the boys' high schools and the girls' high schools. And Bonneville, I think it was the first year where they had gone co-ed. And I can remember thinking, what? You know, this is crazy.
Yeah, so you kind of made history. I think a lot of folks up here are not that familiar with New Orleans had so many, you know, high schools that were not co-ed, right? I mean, both within the Catholic school system and the public school system. Am I right?
Absolutely. In fact, it's really kind of only a recent thing that the Catholic schools have gone co-ed. So, and I don't know that much about them anymore. My kids are in their 20s, so it's not like I'm part of that system anymore. But yeah, there's still some very historically, you know, single-sex schools in the New Orleans area.
Yeah. So you were there when history was made. That's pretty cool.
Okay, now I'm starting to sound really old, Parker. Okay.
You don't look old. I've got all this gray down here. You still have the youthful vibe going. If
Well,
you,
I
you know,
appreciate it. We'll have to thank the girl who does my hair every month.
if you
Then,
hadn't
so.
admitted that, oh, sorry about that. We've got stuff falling down in my office here. If you heard that crash, we're preparing. My boys have their birthday party in my office every year, so we've been trying to get organized for that, and furniture's piled up. So sorry about the noise. But yeah, if you hadn't mentioned your kids are in their 20s, I think everybody would think you were not much older than that yourself. Well, tell us about your LSU years, because clearly you were there a while. You must have liked it to stay from undergrad to law school. But did you know you were going to be an attorney from Jump Street, or did you evolve into that? What was the progress like?
I always kind of thought I wanted to do it. And I got my undergraduate degree in education. And I even worked a year like on my master's, and I just thought, I don't know if I want to do this. And so at that time, student loans the interest rate was kind of high. I bet my interest rates were like 8%, which is unheard of.
Wow, yeah.
And it was a good deal because the interest rates were high because, that was back in the 80s. And so I decided, I'm like, I can't even afford to take a teaching job because they weren't paying that well, pay my student loans back and get a car. So I said, you know what? I've always thought I wanted to do this. So you know what? I'm going to do it. And so
you're like, hey, if I've got student loans, I'm going to really go for it with the student loans. And I've lost 3 years of law school to this.
Yeah. So
I guess you were looking for they say the banks are too big to fail. You were looking for your loans to be too big to fail, right? Was that the game plan?
Yeah. But it's crazy. I mean, spent 10 years paying back student loans. And it's so funny. I hear people saying, oh, I got mine forgiven. I'm like, oh, how does that happen? But anyway, I'll just assume it was character building. So
I share your pain there too. Mine didn't get forgiven. I'd pay back every penny. Exactly. And you're right. It's painful. It's funny. Did you get the experience when I got out of law school? It seemed like I felt like I was 6 inches taller and better looking, because I think suddenly people thought that I had money because I was a quote unquote attorney. But the reality is, as a young lawyer, that's probably the poorest time of your life because you owe a ton of money. You're not yet making much money. Yeah.
I can remember the LSU law parking lot. I had this beat up old Mazda 626. And let me tell you how bad it was. I would have to keep 2 gallons of water in the trunk. So I would drive to LSU I lived in the Hammond area at that time. Right. And I would drive to LSU. The car would cool down while I was in class all day. I'd add water back into the radiator so I could drive it home and do the process all over again. So yeah, was not living large in law school. So.
Well, we share a lot in common because in my family, the Layrissons had what we called the green machine, which was the same 1978 Ford pickup truck that all 4 sons drove as our first set of wheels. Now, when my brother Jean-Paul was in high school in the early 80s, it was a pretty sweet ride. Keep in mind, my youngest brother didn't graduate until 2001. So by the time Bree and I came along in the 90s, it was pretty beaten up. But it was similar to your story in that we had to know, we either had to keep water in the truck or know where so basically I knew every gas station with free water in the Hammond area, because this thing was so beat up, I couldn't even make it back from, say, Taco Bell in Hammond to Ponchatoula without needing a refill. So I can feel your pain, and that's a good testament to just how poor you are when you're trying to get across the finish line as a law student. And it's kind of neat to see you be so successful now, and having seen your career, be something to be proud of, because it was really, really tough to get there. What about the LSU years? Was the football team any good when you were there? Or, what were you into? Just before we get into the professional side of life, what were your fun and fond memories of LSU?
LSU's football team was doing really, really well when I was there. I was there. I'm gonna really date myself. I was there when Shaquille O'Neal was there, so the basketball team was doing really well. And it was funny because I used to work in the dormitory, and Shaquille was dating a girl, so he'd always come in and pick his date up there. So, I don't think he'd know who I am now, but I was always the girl at the front desk. But Skip Bertman was there. Cool. The baseball years were good while I was there. The football years were good. Yeah, LSU was doing a really great job athletically. I was there from 1982 to 1987. Took the 5 years
Okay.
to be undergraduate.
Uh-huh.
No sense in rushing too much. I was having a good time.
Everybody wants that fifth football season when they go to LSU. At least you may not stay a whole fifth year, but you got to at least go 4.5, so you get one more
Absolutely.
fall in Death Valley. But I just went back and started teaching there part-time this semester for the first time, and now I want to bring you back with me next year because you clearly seem to be the lucky charm for all the programs. So I think Coach Kelly would do well to get you back on campus to renew some of that recruiting magic that brought Shaquille O'Neal and Stanley Roberts and Vernon Single, all these great players of that era in basketball. And yeah, you were kind of there in the glory days. That's fun.
It really was. I mean, LSU athletics was really riding high. Not that I had anything to do with it, but it was great as a student, to be able to go to the Maravich Assembly Center and watch Shaquille play. And the baseball team with Skip Bertman, they were doing
what do you win? 5 national championships? He was incredible.
Yeah.
What a great coach.
There were some amazing people there, and it was a really great time to be at LSU. I have very fond memories of being at LSU. Absolutely.
Very cool. Very cool. So you mentioned, I think you were already living in the Hammond area and commuting to LSU, at least at some point that happened. What brought you? I mean, we've heard New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Austin, Texas. How'd you get to Hammond, Ponchatoula, this area?
We looked at the Hammond, Ponchatoula area. I was married at the time, and my husband was working in the Harahan area. And it was just a halfway point. I would go to LSU, and he would go that direction. So it became a halfway point. And then when I graduated from LSU Law School, I was pregnant, and we just made a decision that to go back to New Orleans at that time was not the place we wanted to raise kids.
Right.
And so we bought a small house in Ponchatoula, and I've been here ever since. So I think I've been here since 1996, somewhere in that vicinity. I graduated from law school. After I graduated my undergraduate, I worked for a couple of years, and then I went back to law school and graduated from law school in 94.
Okay, cool. So out of law school, what's your first job? What'd you do coming out of law school?
I worked for a trucking company.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you were in-house, I guess?
I was in-house, and I basically was just doing clerical stuff,
Okay.
So, but at the time, the starting salary for a teacher was really not much.
Right.
I want to say I was offered a job right out of undergraduate, and the starting teacher salary was somewhere in the $15,000 range.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah. So it was kind of painful. So sadly, I got paid more.
I mean, teachers are not well paid today, but that
No,
number is just deplorable for the 90s.
Yeah, it really was. It was a sad amount for what they do. So they truly are an undervalued asset,
Absolutely.
And I just said, wow, I can work here. I don't have to grade papers. I mean, of course, I don't get summers off, but by the same token, I was making almost twice as much money. So I did that, but I always wanted to go back to law school. And, my husband at the time just said, go do it.
Right.
Go give it a try. And so I went back, and that's when I went back to law school.
And did you work while you were in school, or did you focus exclusively on your studies? How did that work?
I did not work that much when I was in law school. I did a couple of things during the summers with attorneys to see what kind of law I liked. And, one summer I worked for—
Where'd you work in the summer?
I worked for one of the criminal attorneys in Hammond. And after I did that, I was like, I don't think this is really me. So, yeah.
It takes a different kind to do that kind of work. Your heart's got to really be in it.
I think you really kind of figure out what you want to do by what you're comfortable dealing with, And ironically, most attorneys are not comfortable doing family law, but I wasn't uncomfortable. And I'll be honest, if you're in
Is that something you realize in law school as you're trying these different local law firms, or did it evolve later when you're actually practicing?
In law school, I knew that, it interested me, and it was, I don't know, it's kind of feel good stuff, helping families is kind of at their worst parts in their lives. And, so I enjoyed the family law stuff while I was at LSU, the classes, and, had some great professors, and, really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And then when I
Who,
got
who taught you
out,
family law? Who were those professors?
oh, Lucy Magoo. I know I had
Yeah,
just,
she was a legend. Yeah.
yeah. So, but yeah, and I had some great professors when I was at LSU too.
Right.
You know, there are some that are gone now, and you
Yeah.
get together with other attorneys, and we all still, if you went to LSU in the early '90s, everybody knew them, and we've all got our stories.
Right.
Professor
Yeah, sure.
Pugh.
No, look,
You
I
know,
didn't take family law, so I never had Professor Magoo, but her husband, Professor Bowers,
yes,
was our law review sponsor when I was the editor of the law review. It was, really helpful to me during that period of my life. So they were the kind of power couple. I don't remember where they came from, Yale or wherever, but I always heard, that she was the big draw, when they came down, they said, look, you got to hire both of us. I don't know if it was truly a package deal or not, but apparently she was a really big deal long before she got to LSU.
I
And
think
of
she
course,
was.
she's, one of the biggest deals in family law, of our lifetime.
Yeah, and I know that she was instrumental in revising the children's code
Right.
and things like that. So yeah, Professor Magoo was a lot of fun, but anybody who went to LSU, you've all got your war stories,
Yeah.
Professor Pugh,
Oh yeah. We
so
I noticed one of my mentors there, who was also my employer because I worked as his research assistant, was Professor Frank Mare. And he taught personal injury classes on torts and admiralty maritime and a bunch of other stuff. But I saw on Facebook a few weeks ago, he turned 90.
wow.
And of course, he's got this white beard. He looked like a pirate. He had a big white beard, and he was terrifying that first year. And all my brothers took him too. And we had different stories. The three of us that went to school there, we're 18 years apart from oldest to youngest, but that same professor was there to terrify us all, but eventually take us under his wing and help us, in our careers. I got my first, job clerking for a judge because of his recommendations. So I know where you're coming from. It's so important to get those mentors. Let me ask you about a wrinkle in the mentor that I couldn't understand or didn't have, which is and just forgive my language, but the badass female lawyer mentor. I mean, in Professor Magoo, you have one of kind of the original big dog women of Louisiana law. And the law is traditionally a very male institution. Now it's more 50-50, or there may be more women at LSU law than men. But, I'm eager to hear what it was like for you coming out of the 80s and early 90s, because I bet it's different than when I got there in 99. But certainly in the era before that, like I remember when Judge Gassaway came on our show, she just talked about how few women there were back in the old days. What was that experience like for you? Was it a lot of women when you were in school there? And what, how did that mean anything
No,
different than, say, Professor Pugh or one of the men on staff?
I want to say we were like 70-30,
Okay.
our class. And if I'm not mistaken, you have more women applying to go to law school now than you do men. So
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah.
I read a study that I was noting as I was sitting in court yesterday, Wednesday, I was in family court, and I looked up and I realized how predominantly female, the attorneys are in that court. And it was easier to count the men than it was to count the women. And when I first started practicing, that was not the case, So, and even like I said,
closer to the opposite, probably.
Yeah. So it's really made a flip in the last, 27 years, 30 years here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I see it, just here in my firm. I'm blessed with a great team around me, but just and the older and grayer guys in the firm are guys, but the young women leading the charge. Megan Notriano Liddell, who know probably, is a great attorney. Stephanie Stafford's about to take the bar exam in a few weeks. I mean, all the young talent that I've seen in recent years, it seems to skew female. So I think you're right. So you kind of develop a taste for family law, if you will, in law school. What's the next chapter after that? Did you go straight into that? Sometimes we find a love for something, but the job opportunity doesn't arise in a way that coincides quickly. Where'd you go after LSU?
Well, after LSU, I got a job in a small firm and in Hammond. And it wasn't like I was looking for family law, but no one else there wanted to fool with it. So being the low man on the totem pole, they would say, Trish, we're going to let you go take care of this.
Right.
And so that's really, and it, you know, after doing that for so long, I felt very comfortable with it. And I was like, just give it to me. I'll take care of it. You know,
Right.
I'll take the domestic clients, you know. So like I said, domestic law, you know, you either feel comfortable doing it or you don't. They, you know, some people describe them as being real needy, but you know,
Mhm.
the way I look at it, you're just seeing people at a bad point in their lives. And so if you can do
Sure.
anything to help them through it and make the process easier for them, then, you know, that's kind of our goal.
Yeah.
And, you know, I also had a lot of undergraduate, for whatever reason, I took a lot of psychology classes. So those two just
Mhm.
kind of went hand in hand, you know,
Yeah.
because, you know, really most of our domestic, I don't want to say all of them, but a lot of our domestic problems really come from a lack of communication. And
That makes
so,
sense.
you know, learning how to better communicate or how to facilitate better communication or
Mhm.
just kind of understanding why people are feeling the way they're feeling, you know, can provide a real insight, especially in the domestic arena.
Yeah. And, you know, it's an area of law. Some areas of law, like mine, for example, as an accident injury lawyer, you could be fortunate enough that you never need one your whole life. You know, and of course, accidents are prevalent; they happen a lot, but it's not as commonplace as family law needs because we live in a world where it's kind of like medicine. Every family is going to need it eventually. You know, like in my family, four boys, been through two divorces. You know, so whether it's divorce or child custody or you know whatever, you know, if it doesn't happen to you, it'll probably happen to your brother, your sister, your mother, you know, whatever. And I look back, you know, having had a dad who was adopted and they needed a family lawyer to do that. And both my parents, you know, were married before they married each other. So there's all these family law needs in every family. And you're right, you know, it has to be dealt with, you know, the right way. Like you have to understand the psychology of it, the communication of it. What is it about that realm of law that you just love? Like, and looking backwards, we'll get to your current job as a judicial hearing officer later. But thinking back to your days as a practicing family lawyer who was picking one side or the other to represent in court, what did you love about that job? What kind of got the juices flowing and made you eager to get to work in the morning?
Well, you know, I really was hoping as I was doing this that I was doing something that was really helping, like I said, helping somebody through a rough patch.
Hmm.
Nobody, you know, going through divorce is a rough thing. Going through a custody battle is a rough thing. You know,
Right.
adoptions, you know, just child support. Those are just unpleasant things. So, you know, for me, if I could make it less painful and if we could get a result where maybe we could, for me, if I could facilitate this family so that they could put aside like the legal stuff and really focus on what was beneficial for their kids and for them
Right.
personally. Because a lot of times we get so wrapped up in our feelings because we're hurt or we're angry or we feel like we've been wronged. But, you know, the reality is we still have to move forward and figure out what's going to be a good path. And,
Hmm.
you know, I used to always tell my clients, you know, it's an incredible teaching moment, especially for your kids, because the way you handle this adversity is going to say a lot about you, but it's also going to model the way you hope your children will deal with adversity later in life.
Right.
And like you said, there are so many people who get divorced nowadays that, you know, you just hope that you can do it with some dignity and some grace and maintain relationships because, you know, family relationships, even if you're not living in the same house, are still incredibly important, especially if you have children.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love the emphasis on the kids and how they're watching the parents go through this and how it's going to impact them not just in that moment in their life, but in how they approach adversity in the future and how they approach relationships in the future. And I mean, you're really setting the tone far beyond the instant, you know, feud if there is one. That's really interesting. Well, thinking back to those days in private practice representing individuals, what did you see in that system that made you mad, that made you sad, that really got you emotional as you're trying to walk people through making the best of a bad situation? But I'm sure you saw injustice that just made your blood boil some days or made you go home and cry the next day. What were examples of those?
You do. I mean, I guess I was fairly sheltered growing up. You don't realize, you know, like the, Office of Community Services, children in need. I mean, you don't realize, I think for me, I did not realize how much poverty there is, you know, how
Right.
many children grow up in environments where they don't have good role models for parents, how many people are truly just uneducated and don't know how to help themselves, so you start, coming. I didn't grow up in a wealthy family, but I didn't grow up in a poor family,
Yeah, you had
and
enough.
so, but seeing how those things just become such an integral part of people's behavior and who they become, sometimes you would look back and say, I don't know how these kids are going to get through this and master life, I
Right.
mean, there's more abuse than I was comfortable dealing with. The juvenile court is unfortunately a very busy court, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a lot
So
of,
many sad stories there.
there really is. And so, again, I was just like, let's see if we can get people through this with the least amount of harm, because
Yeah.
everyone's going to be harmed going through the legal process to some degree. The legal process in and of itself creates winners and losers. I mean, you want to go, you
Right.
want to win. So if we got a winner, it almost implies that we have to have a loser. And it's kind of always been a personal goal that we don't focus on winners and losers, but we focus on ways to pull people and families back together so they can do good things, So
Yeah, it sounds like you focus on making the best of a bad situation and minimizing the loss because, like you say, it will create winners and losers, but it will also create lose-lose situations all the time because you alluded to the financial hardships, especially in our community. This is a poor community, frankly. We don't have a lot of wealthy people. Our middle class is not huge. Tangipahoa has a lot of kids, getting assisted lunch, a lot of families on food stamps and needed services. And it's been my observation from the cheap seats, whether it be in criminal court, where I had a little bit of experience as a city prosecutor and a misdemeanor defense lawyer, and family court, where I just hear the goings on. If you got a situation where people don't have a ton of money in the first place, you inject them into this system that's super expensive, right? So in criminal court, even a small fine can really break a family that's not prepared and for that and is living check to check. In family law, you take a family that's struggling to make ends meet and suddenly they have two households to pay for. Things just
absolutely.
went from bad to worse. So I love your approach on what's best for this family, what's best for these kids. And I know from having been in the judicial system with you so long that when you were an advocate, you were really passionate about that and really respected for achieving that goal. Eventually, you get that tap on the shoulder where you're so respected by not just the local bar of the 200 or so lawyers in Tangipahoa Parish, and I don't know what the count for the whole district is because folks watching at home, the 21st Judicial District, which is our local district, is Tangipahoa, Livingston, and St. Helena parishes. And so we have the same judges that ride the circuit, and that means that Patricia is a judicial hearing officer for all three, parishes. But what I'm getting to here, Tricia, is eventually these judges come to you because they respect you so much. And correct me if I'm wrong about the process, because Lord knows I'm not in it. But it's my understanding to become a hearing officer, which is your current job, where you're helping everybody resolve this. The judges hire you, which means they basically have to vote on you or approve you at some level. So you
Correct,
have
correct.
it's a tough get, right? I mean, there's 200 plus lawyers in this parish alone. Livingston's just as big or bigger, and they come to you. What was that like, and what are the
Well,
emotions
they
for
didn't
you
really, they
as
didn't
you?
really come to
Because the
me.
last hearing officer
The,
is now a judge. It's a really big deal to get this job. How'd that go down?
it's really an honor to, I think, to have this job.
Absolutely.
It is, our district judges, of course, are elected.
Right.
And, I think it's a huge honor to be appointed because you're correct. You apply for the job when it comes available and you're interviewed and they look at, what you've been doing, if you have any special qualifications. And then you're right, it gets voted on by all of the district judges and then they make the decision to, you know, to choose you or offer you a job. And so, yeah, it is a process, you know. So,
And I think there's only 2 of you for the whole 3 parish area, right?
that's correct. There are
Okay.
2 hearing officers, myself and Jay Futrell is the other hearing officer. And we're
Great
always
guys.
opposite each other. So, you know,
Mhm.
I'm just finishing 2 weeks in Livingston. So next week I'll go to Tangipahoa Parish and I'll do 2 weeks, and then Jay will go back to Livingston for 2 weeks. And then we kind of alternate going to St. Helena because we're not out
Yeah.
there nearly so much. The
Yeah, it's
population
so much
is
smaller. I'm sure it doesn't
much
need your
smaller.
attention as often. So what's the job like? Give us a description of the job and then maybe a day in the life as a hearing officer.
Well, the job, I'm really there to assist the family court judges because we have 2 family court judges in our judicial district. We have Jeff Cash and we have Jeff Oglesby. So we seem to have a lot of Jeffs in the 21st. So if I,
And those aren't the only Jeff judges here in you know, Jeff Johnson's in a different court, but yeah.
yeah, he's also in the 21st, but he's not in the family court. So, you know, apparently
Right.
if I wanted to run for judge, I should have changed my name to Jeff. But, you know, so we got, I just call them the Jeffs. You know, I'm just like, I'm here to help the Jeffs, you know. And so what we do is we're really, you know, we handle ancillary matters for the family court. The hearing officers specifically, like, you know, the other thing I like about being a hearing officer is I kind of do something a little different every day.
Yeah.
You know,
How so? What are the different things you do each day?
Like today, I was actually on the bench as a hearing officer listening to protective orders and listening to child support matters. So, and I may do that 2 days a week. And what I do is I basically hear the cases and make a recommendation. If no one files an exception to my recommendation, it goes to the district judge, one of the Jeffs, and they sign it. It becomes a judgment of the court. So for us, we handle a lot of child support. Okay. Wow. And that is just something that I want to say there's, I don't know, 20,000 plus cases, open cases of child support in our tri-parish area. So we are dealing with child support.
20,000 pending. So that's just the cases where people actually got sued for child support. It doesn't include the many, many instances where people are not up to date on child support, but people just aren't bringing a claim. That's staggering. 20,000.
Right, those are open cases through the Department of Children and Family, you know, through support enforcement services. And so they do, you know, they help people if they need to open up a case. They will help people, you know, if they need to increase it or decrease it. So, you know, support enforcement services provides an incredible service. And I know people sometimes get frustrated, but there's an incredible capacity, large amount of people that are being served in a very efficient way. And I know it sometimes may not feel that way. Yeah. But if you had to add all of these child support cases on your family court docket every week, it would be overwhelming. You know, our family court judges would really be bogged down just with that.
And I'm glad you mentioned how efficient the system is because, you know, I kind of came up with the Jeffs. They were both a couple years ahead of me in bar admission, but they're certainly my generation of attorney. You know, the first guys kind of elected to the bench of our generation, not the old timers that came before you and me. And they're really great lawyers. I mean, you know, both your Jeffs in family court as well as Jeff Johnson in district court. They were outstanding attorneys. They come from great families. There's a great Ponchatoula connection there with Judge Jeff Oglesby, because many of us that went to Ponchatoula High School were taught by his amazing mother, Miss Pat Oglesby, who's I think now retired, but was a great honors English teacher at PHS, a very popular educator. You mentioned about how underpaid they, you know, are and were. But she served our community so well. Certainly, I was, you know, really benefited from her class. And the other Jeff, you know, in your court, Jeff Cash, his dad, Rodney, was one of the legendary lawyers of Hammond, you know, unfortunately no longer with us, but the head of one of the biggest and best firms around. So you're talking about guys that come from good families, you know, that do a great job. And I know they work hard. They're, you know, as do you. So you guys are processing a ton of cases up there, it sounds like.
It is. So, you know, the hearing officers also assist the family court judges on their rule day. So once a week we have a rule day where people are asking for some relief or something to be done.
And can we explain what a rule day is for folks outside the system? Because that may not make sense to folks beyond you and me.
You know, sometimes it doesn't make sense at all.
It's a little inside baseball.
Normally if you are petitioning the court for some sort of relief, I want to change custody, you ask for a rule to modify custody, or I want to increase or decrease child support, or, you know, I need a divorce, you know. A lot of that is done through rules, which are kind of smaller matters that we can handle, you know, that a lot of it's procedural, but may require some testimony. But Rules Day, we try to handle a bunch of things that may need a little bit of testimony.
So it's a court day where you can handle a lot of cases, as opposed to a day that's set aside for trial and just one case.
Where you may need hours and hours and hours on each side to present your side of the case. So on Rules Day, the hearing officers, Jay and myself, we will, depending upon which Jeff we're with that day, we will also be available to help attorneys or people who are self-representing themselves to, you know, work through some things. And a lot of times we work really hard to try and see if we can reach some consensus and find some common ground and see if we can put together something that this family can start working in a positive direction. And a lot of times we get consent judgments, and it kind of gets them started. And then
is consent judgment essentially where the parties will agree, and then the judge will make that the law of their case?
Yes,
more or less.
Yeah, okay. And really, you know, for the most part, if the parties want to agree to something, the court is pretty willing to endorse whatever they'd like to do, provided it's not against public policy or, you know, harmful in some way to either the children or either one of the parties. So the hearing officers, we work with them, and a lot of times with their attorneys, or a lot of people in family court are self-represented. Again,
how's that break down? Like, maybe there's a stat, or maybe you just use a rule of thumb, but I would imagine a lot of people are unrepresented by legal counsel.
I don't have a good stat, but in my estimation, at least a third are representing themselves. And that number continues to grow. I want to say that criminal court and family court are the two fastest growing portions of our court, you know, so
that makes sense.
It's huge. And so a lot of people just cannot afford. And the 21st has, through their website, self-help forms. So if somebody says, I need a divorce, but I can't afford an attorney, there are some divorce forms that you can download and file yourself. And so, you know, as the hearing officer on those rule days, we will meet with people who sometimes just don't understand the process because they're representing themselves, and we'll kind of help them see if we can achieve some consensus. Or if we can't, then we will do what we can to get them set up on a trial date, or, you know, whatever we need to do. The other thing the hearing officers do, and we do a lot of this on rule days, is on the days where I'm not in court with one of the Jeffs, and I'm not on the bench doing child support or paternity or protective orders, on those other days, we do mediations. And I'm really proud to say the 21st Judicial District, I don't know that we are the only one who has hearing officers who do mediations, but maybe one of the few. And you can schedule a time, come meet with me, sit down, you know, where maybe we have 2 or 3 hours, and we can work on some things, you know. And
I love to hear that. And I'd love to dig a little deeper into the mediation concept, because it's something we use a lot in my practice. But I also noticed when I was an employee of the federal court system as a law clerk, those federal judges have magistrate judges, and there's some overlap between what a federal magistrate judge would do for their district judge and what you hearing officers would do for your judges. And they did a form of mediation, these settlement meetings, that was super effective. And so mediation, as I understand it, you know, in lay terms, I would share with them, this is where folks from both sides can come and sit down with you, and you're neutral. You don't have a dog in this hunt. You work for the court. You're there for the administration of justice, but you can help walk them through the issues, because like you say, if 1 in 3 people aren't represented, they might not know what's relevant to the outcome of their case and what the general rule of thumb is and whatnot. And you can break it down and kind of help them perhaps end up at a consent, like you mentioned earlier, an agreement where you say, look, buddy, I hear you don't want to pay anything for child support. That's not realistic. We've got this code that says you're going to pay something between here and there. We can go to trial and you can take your chances. Or, have I summed it up? And please put a better tone on it. But this is such a great thing for efficiency, because in a world where lawyers charge by the hour, you're way better off if you can get something done by agreement at a mediation than paying some lawyer hundreds of dollars per hour, not every time, but probably most of the time. What are your thoughts about that as an issue?
I mean, the mediation is a great tool, but I have to say, Parker, we have a lot of attorneys who bring up clients and do the mediation as well. But I think it's still a very efficient way for them to handle cases. If we can work out a lot of issues in those 2 or 3 hours that we can spend together, then really you're saving yourself some money, and you're saving your clients money as well.
Right.
Because we're not spending a lot of time preparing for trial and hours at trial. And, there's a lot of preparation that goes with attorneys preparing for trial, especially if we're doing
and a lot of expense. You're paying for exhibits to be blown up and
exactly documentation,
very expensive.
Bank accounts, appraisals on property. So there's a lot of documentation, and that just takes time. And when you're taking an attorney's time, you are paying for that attorney's time. And, attorneys perform a very valuable service. I mean, there are just some, I can remember as in private practice, some people just had a really hard time organizing things. And, for the most part, attorneys are pretty good organizers.
Right.
So, but, a lot of the attorneys say, I'd rather mediate it. Let's see where we are. I think we can reach some agreement. Nobody's going to be 100% happy, but nobody's 100% unhappy either. So,
to me, the key is everybody has a choice. At mediation, unlike trial with a judge or arbitration with an arbitrator, at mediation, if you make a deal, it's because you choose to. The magistrate judge may have a very strong opinion about what you should do. They may say, this is what I see the judge is doing a lot, and therefore you're probably, but ultimately you don't force anything down their throat. You help educate them.
It's not mandatory. It's, you can walk out at any time. If you say that woman is just on my last nerve, you are free to get up and leave, or I just don't like what she's telling me and I don't believe her.
If they say that about you, they've got the problem, not you. Because
I don't know.
I know you're trying your level
that. So, but like I said, we're seeing people sometimes at a low point, and they're really stressed, and and then sometimes they just don't like what they're hearing. And, it's
for a lot of people, you're probably seeing them on the worst day of their life. I mean, I cannot imagine. I love my boys, the anxiety, the fear, the desperation that would consume me if I were in court, fearful of losing them custody wise. So you could see where people would kind of reasonably have a tough day. You mentioned something, Trish, I want to bring up here to share with folks here, and that is this website. I've pulled up here for our viewers the 21st JDC website. So you can see here this 21st Judicial District Court site, which I believe is just 21stjdc.org. As Trish has mentioned, there's a self-help section that talks about representing yourself. So, I would encourage people to dig in here and just check things out, because as she mentioned, there are forms there that can help you. There is, a section on representing yourself. It looks like even a video in some instances. So, 21stjdc.org could be very helpful to you if you don't have the funds to hire an attorney. And let me ask you this. So obviously you and I are not going to get on here and recommend any lawyers to hire or talk specifically about giving legal advice. But I think what we can do possibly is talk about the process for hiring an attorney, okay, or the process for engaging in family law services. So if there's a mom, a dad, anybody out there who's maybe considering filing a family court action, but has no idea where to start, where to go, again, not giving legal advice on how to do this or that, but just how to approach. What's the right thing? Should the first step be a call to an attorney? And if so, how do you find out who, what's the process for how somebody can best serve themselves in a way that doesn't unduly burden the judicial system? Because what I noticed when I was a clerk, for federal court, as I mentioned earlier, was these unrepresented, undereducated, uninformed people could sometimes gum up the works. So it was just like, man, if somebody had just told them, dude, you can't do that, you would have saved a day of your time not waiting in court watching 49 other people before you got up there for the judge to say you did this wrong, you filed this wrong. What's the best place to start if somebody is inevitably going to need the services of family court?
Well, let me just say this, as the hearing officer, when I'm in family court on rules day, both of the Jeffs say, if you're representing yourself, I'm gonna let you go talk to my hearing officer. Mm-hmm. And really, a lot of what I do is just education. Yes. I just tell them, hey, I know you want to get divorced today, but that's just not going to happen because there are certain, procedures I need you to follow.
Yeah, aren't there mandatory waiting periods, and it's longer with kids? So if people don't know that,
it is. And sometimes you haven't filed the right documents just yet. Right. And so, guys, I got to tell you, I need you to go back, and I can refer them to the website. But exactly, I think we're working really hard not to gum up the works because people are just not educated as to the proper procedures to do it. So part of my job is to help educate them so that they can do this right, because nobody wants to get a judgment of divorce and find out it wasn't done right and find out you're still married, And, I've seen that happen a few times in my career where somebody came to me and said, well, I got divorced here. And I'm like, I'm looking in the record. I don't see a judgment of divorce anywhere. And
I think we've all seen the sitcom TV show where they're at the wedding and they realize the bride's still not divorced from the last husband. Uh-oh. I mean, that comes from a real place. It happens in real life. It does come
from a real place. It really does. And I've seen that more than I probably, should have, where they just didn't finish the procedure and they thought they had hired an attorney and it was done and there's not a judgment in the record, or, there was no service on someone. So when people come in and they're representing themselves in court, the job of Jay and myself is to help not let that be, a bottleneck, so let's educate you as to what you need and where you can go from there. And if at that point they decide they want to get an attorney, both of the family court judges, if it's a first setting, they'll say, if you want time to go get an attorney, we're going to get you another date and we're going to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Because really, we want everybody to go through the legal system as painlessly as possible, and really, I think both the Jeffs work really, really hard because family law is so emotionally charged to do what they can to kind of calm things down and help people through. Yeah. But, at that point, if you really want an attorney, and you're right, we can't recommend anybody, but if you're going to family court, then you need to find somebody who practices family law because that's what you want. You want somebody who's there all the time. You want somebody who's very familiar with it. And for the most part, you find that niche of people who do family law because they do it well, because they communicate well, because they can help people calm down and help them see the light at the end of the tunnel, or, help them figure out the process and what we can do. I tell people a lot of times there's not that much law in family law. There's certain parameters that we have to adhere to, and there are clearly some laws, but a lot of our stuff is just, I don't feel comfortable. Well, that's not what the law is, and there's standards.
Right.
And so, like I said, for the hearing officers, a lot of what we do is education. And
so it sounds like you've got kind of the perfect background for that, because your first career aspiration was education. You studied education. You did this extra year on top of undergrad, and then you did all this psychology too. So long before you found the law, which is clearly a big part of your job, you found these foundational cornerstone elements in psychology, education, and it sounds like that's a big part of your job day to day.
It really is. And I mean, when I was doing it way back when, I'd have never, it's kind of amazing when you see these things kind of come together, because I would have never expected. I just really liked the psychology classes, but I would have never realized how incredibly valuable it was later on in life, how it would be, and when I was practicing by myself, one of the amazing things that happened to me was I got to office with a bunch of psychologists. And, psychologists would say, hey, attorney, I need you to answer a legal question. And then I could in turn, pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, explain to me why these people feel this way. And it was an incredible journey, and
that's a great resource.
Incredibly educational for me to say, okay, so now I understand what's driving the emotion here. And, if you can kind of figure that out, you can usually find a solution.
Yeah. Great point. Well, look, I asked you earlier in your old career as a practicing family lawyer about the things that drove you crazy, the things that broke your heart, the things that pissed you off. What about the things that just make you beam and smile, both in your former career as an advocate and your current career as a hearing officer? When do you go home just feeling really good about the day? And what typically would have been the kind of thing to take place at the office to cause that feeling of a job well done?
I will tell you, adoptions are always feel good stuff, because those are always happy days. People are so excited. Children are coming into their lives, or sometimes older, much older children. Yeah. But it's always a happy day, You're
so right. My wife's youngest sister was adopted by her parents. She's, as maybe a young teen or preteen, but a later than you'd expect. Some adoptions, like my dad came from the orphanage when they were itty bitty babies, but like Jeff Oglesby did the adoption, and he did a great job. He was so compassionate and empathetic to these families. But you're right. It's such a happy experience to have this new family union. That's got to be a great day as a practitioner.
The other thing that makes me really happy is when I see people who may have come in initially and they were just like, throwing daggers at each other. And when something's changed, when they really kind of realize that, they're not making any headway, I kind of come to the realization it's probably takes about the same amount of energy to do something kind as it does to do something really negative.
Right.
And, you're just better off doing the kind thing. I tell people all the time, I'm like, karma, don't underestimate karma, but when people come back and say, hey, you know what, we went and sat down and we really talked about this and we really realized we don't want to go do this and where we're fighting all the time. And they said, hey, we've settled everything and we're getting out of the court system. For me, that's a really happy day. It's a real win when people start realizing, especially in family court, when they start putting their kids' needs above their own need to seek revenge or make someone hurt. So if I can help people get to that realization, and when they see a change in their children, it's, and they say, hey, you know what, Ms. Hicks, we've settled everything. We're just going to submit a judgment and we are going to move on and help our kids get, become healthy human beings. It's that always makes me feel great.
I bet. And I bet it's cool when you get to report back to the judges and they're like, whoa, you settled that one? Like, wait, the War of the Roses. I didn't think that. They think for sure they've got this nasty trial ahead, and you bring the good news back. I cleared your docket, Judge, at least to this part of it.
Exactly. And it really is a good feeling to say, hey, that case? Or to call the judge's secretary and say, hey, we met at mediation. We spent like 6 hours today, but guess what? Take them off your trial docket. They're good.
That's great.
So, I always feel good when we can do that. And even if we don't take everything off the trial docket, if we can reduce it from 8 issues to 2 issues, it's just, I think people don't realize how heavy that monkey on their back is until they get it off.
I bet.
And then, they realize that they were really not breathing well. So, so it is good when you can clear something off of one of the judge's dockets. And, and primarily that's my job, to help them get through all of the stuff that they have.
And that might be the first night of good sleep that mom or dad gets in years, right? I mean, you've given them the closure to know this is going to be the deal. This is when I'll see my kids. I'm either living in this house or not. Just all the uncertainty is gone away. Wow, that's got to be really gratifying for you to help people get there.
It is gratifying, and I know sometimes, I used to also do it like a parenting course. I used to teach a parenting course and got incredible, feedback from that. And that was an incredible gift that I got to do. And it's really, really paved the way for me being a hearing officer now, because those skills that I did while doing the parenting class are, it's amazing. But, sometimes.
Well, you shouldn't have let that one slip, Trish, because when Brandy and I move in across the street, I may ask you to dust off your teaching gloves and come out of retirement, because with our little boys, I got a late start at having kids, so I have a lot of years ahead of me. I need to improve my parent game.
But even like rewarding things. I can remember doing a parenting class, and I can remember this one girl just telling me, I don't like you. I don't like you. I don't like you. She said very little in the parenting class, except I don't like you. And it was almost a joke with the rest of the class. They're like, she don't like you. I'm like, I'm pretty clear. And I can remember one day, this had to be 3 or 4 years later, I was shopping in the grocery store like at 6 a.m., hair in a messy bun, wearing sweats. And I hear somebody say, Miss Hicks. And I thought, oh, God, no one calls me Miss Hicks, much less looking like this at 6 a.m. And then I turned around and I immediately knew who she was, because she had made her dislike for me very well known during the 8 weeks that we were doing this class. And she said, I just want to tell you, I finally started doing some of the things you were suggesting, and we worked everything out. And I just need to apologize to you, because I just wasn't in a place to listen and hear what your message was. But here this was 3 years later. I wasn't sure she was going to hurl a canned good at me or not. But, it turned out, and honestly, it's like one of my favorite stories, because
I bet.
She even wrote at the end of every parenting class, I would say, well, tell me what you liked and what you didn't like. And my goodness, she wrote, War and Peace about how much she disliked me.
Right.
And she even said, are you sure you're going to give it to Dr., the doctor who administers his class, Dr. Thompson? I said, I promise I'm going to give it to him,
Yeah, yeah.
But it was a great story, because they figured it out. And sometimes the light comes on, not when you're right there in court, but sometimes a little bit later down the road. So.
Well, sure, because like you said, she said you have to be ready to receive it. You have to be in a place where you can hear it and process it and make use of that wisdom. And it's kudos to her for not only turning that corner, but having the character to come to you, because that had to be a tail between your legs, kind of almost embarrassing moment. When she looked back on her behavior during that class, perhaps.
Yeah, it was funny, because I said to her, I said, so what made you change your mind? And she said, well, I just ran out of other options, so I decided I'd try the ones you suggested.
Right.
They worked, So it was a lot of fun. But the bigger reward is that they were getting along. The kid was doing well,
of course,
and they weren't before, so that was good.
Yeah. Well, speaking of running out of other options, we're about to run out of time. I promised you I'd get you out of here by 6.
Fair enough.
So with the last few minutes we have, I want to ask just a little bit about you personally, like what you enjoy, because we've talked, you've got an amazing career, and I'm glad we were able to dig into it a little bit. An hour doesn't give us enough time to tell it all, but you sure shared a ton. But what do you do when you're not saving the judicial system and helping people get through the darkest days of their life with divorces and custody battles and whatnot? What do you do for fun?
You're very gracious. For fun, I have 2 amazing kids, and like I said, they are 27 and almost 24. And, I do spend a lot of time with my kids. They are probably the best things I've ever done. And so we like to travel. I do things with my kids on a regular basis. We try to get together. My daughter and I go do girls' trips. There's something really wonderful. I always thought when my kids were younger, oh, this is the best time ever. And then they get a little older and you find out this, I can remember thinking, this is even better. I got to tell you, there's something wonderful about having kids who are old enough to go have a drink with you. They are, it's a lot of fun. Yeah. And I'm so happy that the kids have continued to make time in their lives for me, because I think that's just one of the things that, you
can't take it for granted.
No, you can't.
Move across the country and never have fun.
and you know, they have their own lives, and it just means the world to me that they continue to make time to do things with me. And so we do travel. The kids and I take, you know, vacations together. And
Do y'all have a favorite spot you return to, or you try something new each time? How's that work?
You know, we like to try something new all the time, and we've been out of the country a good bit, and there's always some place. You know, I think our next couple of gigs, I think we're going to do like national parks in the United States.
Oh yeah, now you're speaking
You
my
know,
love language. That's
so
on my.
we've
That's
done
on
a
my
lot
bucket
of
list.
Europe, and it's wonderful. COVID's really slowed a lot of that down, but you know, maybe the hidden gem is that we come back and we're doing stuff here, and we're going to see some amazing places here. So, and you know,
you won't regret that. My brother Louis just did Yellowstone this past summer with his kids, and they were blown away. It's just amazing. Yeah.
You know,
so cool.
I like to be outdoors. I've always been outdoorsy. I still enjoy being outdoors. You know, I just recently got a puppy. I don't know what possessed me, but
Max is the greatest dog ever. Yeah.
Yeah,
very
and you
cute
know, I was
puppy.
just commenting that I've said, Max, sit like 1,000 times, and he finally has sit down. But the other night, it was, you know, 2:30. I'm half asleep. He's barking. I bring him outside. Good boy, does his business. He comes back in, and he turns and he goes into my bedroom. And, you know, I just didn't have the energy to fight him and put him back in the kennel. And I said, all right. And I picked him up and I put him in bed with me. Well, you know, the 1,000 times I had to say, sit, didn't really take. But the one time I let him in the bed for 2 hours, that dog, you know, it's going to be ugly the next couple of nights because he's now convinced that he's the big dog and he belongs in the bed with me.
It sounds like Max has found a new permanent home in the bedroom. You haven't gotten there yet. You're like those family law clients that don't see yet where reality is going to take them one day. But Max knows he's got his spot. He's not giving up his turf.
Oh yeah, he's got it. He's like, I just turn right here and go into that room, and I think she might cave. So, so last night was a little rough because I learned a whole new level of howling and barking I'd never heard before. But I was like, oh Max, I love you dearly, but I don't know.
Well, my kids love Max, so we're really looking forward to living in the neighborhood with him. He's a cute little dog who's going to be a cute big dog really soon. He's destined to be a big boy. Well, look, you've been a great guest. I've really enjoyed this interview. Before we go, is there anything else on your mind, on your heart that you'd like to share with our viewers?
You know, I just want to say there are so many different ways to settle disputes. And the court system is there for a very real purpose. But I got to tell you, I think I've found in the 27 years that I've been doing this, there is no one who knows your children and your family and your schedules and your needs and your children's needs better than the two parents who brought them into this world. So, you know, if there's anything that the court system can do to help you facilitate some agreements, your children will benefit so much more if they can see their mom and their dad or their extended family getting along with each other and supporting each other and supporting them. There is just, so while we have to do certain things in the court system, there are a lot of things that we can do through the court system. There are mediators out there, you know, aside from the ones that are available at the courthouse. But there are so many, there's parenting classes. And, you know, I really find that education, if people get educated and know what's out there and available to them, I think we'll be approaching things a little bit differently. And I really want to say, I really appreciate both the Jeffs because they both have a real focus on doing everything they can to make the court experience a valuable one and one that advances families in their familyness and not used to tear them apart. So, you know, anything we can do at the court, we are happy to do. But guys, I got to tell you, if we can put aside some of our hostility, you guys will come up with the best plans ever for your kids. So
that's great advice. And I'm not surprised it's coming from you because that's what you do. So folks, there you have her, Patricia Hicks. She lived up to the hype. I told you she was one of the most impressive, fantastic people around. And I can't thank you enough, Trish, for being my guest this week.
Well, I appreciate it. I feel very honored to be one of the guests you've asked to be here.
Yeah, well, no, look, I've been looking forward to interviewing you, and you did not disappoint. So to everybody else, we'll be back next week, same time. Thank you all for tuning in. Take
All
care.
right. Thank you.